Hey guys, what's up? I'm Sci-Hi. I'm back after a brief battle with COVID to share what I believe is a really cool and spicy kind of mid-range historic deck that I've been having a lot of success with in Best of One. Now, while I was down with COVID, I was able to do a lot of testing and exploration with new Capenna, a lot of the new cards, and trying to find what's really breaking into historic as far as what new cards, maybe new archetypes, what archetypes are benefiting the most. And honestly, so far, I haven't really found anything too groundbreaking or radically new until now. What I believe in what this deck has going on is quite interesting. Now, before I get into it and share this, it's very important. I just want, in case you look at this deck and may think, oh, this is just a goofy theme Boros, werewolf deck that a new player may craft, just putting a bunch of werewolves in. Let me try to allay those concerns right away and give you a little history behind this deck concept. Now, last season, doing a lot of mythic grinding, I ended up playing against the same user named Elspeth69. Very cool name, by the way. But if you're out there watching, I'd like to shake your hand, whoever you are, because this deck is pretty damn cool and very unorthodox. And honestly, I don't know the exact shell, so I've kind of pieced it together and added some of my own flair to it. But this person that I played twice, Elspeth69 with this Werewolves deck, the first time I played them, they were ranked in the top 25. I think they were like ranked 22 or 21 mythic or something like that. Now, when you play somebody that high up in the rank, I find it very interesting to look at their deck and see kind of a real-time, momentary glimpse of what deck are they using and in the moment, like what is working for them that they've gotten ranked so high. And I was very surprised that both times I played them, they beat me, and they're using very unconventional cards, just not really seen commonly in Historic, nor is this archetype seen in Historic. And this was Best of One, by the way. So I was really baffled and just kind of interested in what is this group of cards, what is going on here, what makes this deck tick, why is it so good, how has this person gotten so highly ranked, is it just a fluke? But so I decided to try to embark on creating this deck and see for myself. So before we dive in, very important, definitely like, subscribe if you aren't already for more deck content, deep strategy, deep mind strategy, mythic gameplay. Without further ado, let's dive into the deck and see what we're actually talking about. So this is kind of a Boros Werewolves deck, as I've said. However, what it really is a mid-range Boros kind of aggro with some control elements. But before we get into each card and why I believe this is so good in the historic, at least Best of One meta, let me just cover the obvious, really cool things going on from New Capenna. Now we've got a really cool combo in Urabrask, Heretic, Praetor, and Drannith Magistrate. So if you're not already familiar with this, we'll just cover it real quickly. Urabrask, Heretic, Praetor is a legendary Phyrexian 4/4 haste for 5, which is already pretty standard bar for a decent, aggressive 5-mana creature. We've got Goldspan Dragon, other cards that 4/4 haste is not bad at all. But what this card is doing is pretty incredible in my opinion, and I was surprised not as much of talk about this card or excitement as I thought, because to me it was one of the more interesting cards spoiled early on, and people kind of I feel like they're kind of overlooking it. But what this does is really powerful. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library and you may play it this turn. So you're essentially drawing one extra card a turn. Granted, it survives and you get to your upkeep. You're just starting to generate value. But more interestingly is at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of their library. They may play it this turn. So first of all, just with Urabrask, this is not actually totally symmetrical effect in that you're drawing an extra card, essentially, and they get to see it because it's exiled. But their first draw on their turn, you get to see the only card that they drew, presumably, where you're still drawing a card and doing this. So you're getting double the cards now because you're drawing more, but they're not seeing the actual card you draw. So just in a vacuum, this thing's great at just closing games after long, grindy matchups where there's not much left on the field, and this kind of can function like a planeswalker where it's just generating value and also giving you total information to close the game quickly. But it gets really nasty for your opponent, and we can get an absolute, almost against some decks, just a total hard lock in that if we have Drannith Magistrate in play, which is a 1/3 human wizard that says your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Now, obviously this means now that the card that they're exiling in their turn, the first thing they draw that's getting exiled, they can't play that. They can't cast that card anymore. The only thing they can possibly do once these two things are on board, as terms of drawing cards, is they can only play a land. If they happen to get a land, they can play the land. They can't cast any of the spells they get. If they happen to have something already on board, depending on the game state, they could draw a card from like a planeswalker or something else in play. But hopefully you've destroyed that with some of the other cards that this deck is equipped with. So that is a really powerful combo to just soft or even completely hard lock an opponent out of the game. And just to be clear, this is not like an all-in combo that's do or die that we're hoping to do every game. This is just a powerful backdoor victory that you have lurking in this deck after grinding aggressive play in the first few turns. This is just something that kind of can happen by accident, and suddenly it's oops, big oops for your opponent. These two cards are in play, and it's an oh shit moment when they realize, uh-oh, I'm not going to be able to cast anything the remainder of the game. Like, I'm not going to see any new cards for the remainder of the game. Moreover, both of these cards are pretty powerful in their own right. Obviously, Urabrask, talked about, can just be powerful in closing games, in grinder matchups, drawing you cards, giving you information, attacking and killing planeswalkers with a 4/4 haste is no joke at all. Now with Drannith Magistrate, this little 1/3 dude does a lot that may not be that obvious. While it may seem pretty pedestrian, pretty boring just to have a 1/3 creature, this effect is very unique, and we need to take notice of Magic cards that do very unique things, such as Urabrask as well. There's nothing really in Historic that does something exactly like this. It's a remarkable card for sure, and so is Drannith Magistrate. Now, with Drannith Magistrate, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Now, I already talked about, obviously, that's a huge combo with Urabrask if these two just happen to get in play at the same time. But even if they're not, and you just have this guy, this does so much work in the meta right now. Your opponent's not able to cast anything with Flashback. They're not Faithless Looting from the graveyard anymore. They're not reanimating things with Flashback reanimation spells. In addition, a really hot deck right now is the Symmetry Sage kind of prowess, all-in, hyper-aggressive deck that runs just the all-star card in like all formats right now, Expressive Iteration. This stops your opponent from casting spells off Expressive Iteration. Yes, it's true, oftentimes people use Expressive Iteration to find their third land and just play the land, so it won't stop that. However, it absolutely will stop anything else. They can't exile a card and cast it. They can only play a land, so it stops all that. In addition to that and all the Flashback shenanigans, this completely shuts off. This completely shuts off all the Mizzix Mastery bullshit that you may face on the ladder. You know, how annoying is it to get Dragon Stormed to death? This just stops all of that. You don't even need mana or getting rid of their graveyard. Just this in play, they're not able to use Mizzix Mastery and copy spells in their graveyards like Emergent Ultimatum for huge haymakers. They can't do this anymore because they can't cast things unless they're directly in their hand. So this functions and does a lot of work just on its own. And again, if you just happen to bump into this combo kind of accidentally as the game chugs along, it's just that big oh shit moment for the opponent where they suddenly read these cards and they're like, huh, that's interesting. I can't play anything. Okay, well, that's game, I guess. And this has happened many times already, and it feels great. Super powerful to just hard lock an opponent like that. So let's cover the rest of the cards. And again, I know this looks like just a kind of a random pile of decent cards that may not have a lot of synergy, but let's take a deeper look at each of these cards and see why there is so much synergy here and what's going on. So we'll cover another kind of peculiar card that doesn't see a ton of play in Historic in Containment Priest. Now, Containment Priest is a 2-mana human cleric 2/2 flash, which has another unique, interesting ability that says if a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. So similar to Drannith Magistrate in stopping reanimation spells from the graveyard, this is going to stop all reanimation effects of specifically reanimating a creature from the graveyard back into play. Suddenly, if they try to do that, that creature is getting exiled. It's gone. They can't do that. Also, very popular card in Historic, Collective Company, used in elves, white-green life gain, angels, etc. Very powerful card for sure. This, because it has flash, Containment Priest can completely negate a Collected Company, essentially countering it. They play Collected Company, you cast this in response, and oops, they're not getting any of those creatures they happen to find. They're all getting exiled. Similarly, I believe there's a lot of other things as hits as well. Too many to mention, to be honest, but we've covered the main things as hits. Now, even if your opponent doesn't have any of those cards, just having a 2/2 flash body in the early game, being able to cast it on opponent's end step against control, is totally fine. But what's really spicy with Containment Priest is we are a werewolf deck in a way. We've got a subtle werewolf theme going on here, which leads me to, we can cover the all-powerful Brutal Cathar. If not already familiar, of course, this is the 3-mana 2/2. Whenever he comes into play, you're getting to exile a creature until it leaves play. Additionally, has bonuses at night. It becomes a 3/3 first strike with ward, pay 3 life. And if it happens to turn from night back to day, every time it retransform into Brutal Cathar, you get to exile yet another creature. Obviously, the drawback with cards like this is that if this gets destroyed or leaves the battlefield, they get their stuff back. However, we already talked about the Containment Priest shuts all that off. So in these grindy games, Brutal Cathar is huge. Being able to exile a creature is huge. We don't have to worry about, like a Voice of the Blessed or whatever the card is. Anything that gets super huge and we can't kill it with damage conventionally, we can just exile it. And with Containment Priest, we can mitigate the potential downside if they do happen to try to kill our Cathar and get those creatures back. They will not get them back. And a lot of people are so unfamiliar with this deck and these cards that you can just play people out where they, like, I attack, bait them into killing the Cathar, even when the Containment Priest is in play, and I know it's going to be a favorable attack because they may overextend, like blocking this with 2/1/1s and totally miss the interaction here that they're not going to get their stuff back because people are so eager to get the cards you exiled back that they just a lot of times they overlook this. But if you're playing against a more skilled player that doesn't overlook it and they know the interaction, again, this has flash, so you can surprise people with it and totally blow up their expectations of what they expected to happen in a turn. You can pull ahead and just get really one-sided plays to happen with this powerful, unique interaction of Containment Priest not allowing your opponent to get back the creatures they got with Brutal Cathar. So very spicy, interesting card in Containment Priest. Beyond just having synergy already with cards in the deck's contents, it has very good application against things you will face in the current metagame in Historic right now. So very interesting card in Containment Priest. Moving on, in kind of this prison, like hate bear type deck, we do have one copy of Lion Sash. Obvious comparison, this card with the Bomb of Scavenging Ooze in green. Very similar effect where we get to pay a white, exile cards from graveyards. The advantage or disadvantage first with Lion Sash compared to Scavenging Ooze, of course, it's one less power, one less toughness. You don't gain a life when you exile a creature. However, on the upside, Lion Sash has a lot more going for it in that this gets +1/+1 from exiling any permanent, not just creatures. Also has the reconfigure ability, which you can do some goofy, kind of silly combat tricks with this. Doesn't come up too often, but we're running one copy here because, as I already mentioned, we do have some defense against graveyards. So we don't necessarily have to just exile stuff from their graveyard. We've got the Drannith Magistrates and the Containment Priests, which can handle a lot of the most common graveyard crap that will happen. I also failed to mention Arcanist, which is so powerful in the format as well. This will stop your opponent from using Arcanist to recast things from the graveyard, which is absolutely huge. But there are some limitations. The Grease Fang Annoying Vehicle combo, this will not stop those things, of course, because it's a vehicle. It's not a creature when it comes back from the graveyard, so it dodges and evades these cards. However, having one copy of Lion Sash, we do get more graveyard removal, and this is a very good way to deal with those vehicles and get a little bit better chance in that matchup. Just one copy, though, because there's diminishing returns on this card the more you run. We don't really get a lot of benefit from having more than one in play. We're just looking for that, having that ability, this activated ability of having some graveyard control in the deck. So again, we're just running one copy just to have occasionally floating around the deck when it's good. And in certain matchups, it'll be absolutely great. It'll be better than good. So one copy of Lion Sash. Moving on to Rahilda Wanted Cutthroat. Again, continuing the werewolf theme. Why is this important, this werewolf theme? Well, having all these cards that care about day and night is significant here. We have these early drops of Rahilda Wanted Cutthroat. We immediately get the day-night cycle going. And all of these werewolves are very strong, even if it's not night. However, if it does turn to night, these cards become like busted good value. They're already very great, but they become absurd when it becomes nighttime. And against control, a lot of times it will become night because they will pass, they won't play a card, so it'll become night. But Rahilda is a very powerful card in its own right. A 2/2 first strike. Every time it deals damage, we're plucking a card from their deck, exiling it, and we get to play that card on a turn we've attacked with a werewolf or a wolf. So important to note that even if Rahilda takes some cards and gets killed, our other werewolves can activate the cards that we took, and we can get more value and play our opponent's cards, which is very demoralizing, of course, to beat your opponent with their own cards. So Rahilda's super strong, and like I said, if it becomes night, it's just absurd. Then it becomes a 2/2 double strike. Now you're potentially taking 2 cards from them every time it connects, and just super powerful. Moving on the rest of the 2-drop or 2 casting cost spells. Lightning Helix needs no explanation. Just an awesome card. 3 damage to any target. We gain 3 life. This is a great hedge against the hyper-aggressive decks. I mentioned the Symmetry Sage deck is extremely hot right now. This is great against that deck. Taking out a creature early and potentially gaining life is fantastic because we are kind of a mid-range deck after all. We want to get ideally to 5 mana so we can play our Haymakers. So Lightning Helix will help us survive that early game. In addition to killing creatures, of course, it's just awesome, even against control. We can kill their planeswalkers with this, threaten them. We can go to their face if we're trying to close the game quickly and have an opportunity to do so. So Lightning Helix is just a fantastic card. Probably run like 8 of them, honestly, if we could, but we can't. So we run 4 Lightning Helix. Moving on, mention the Brutal Cathars again with the werewolf theme, but then we move on to another really powerful card that's almost like the core of this deck. Reckless Stormseeker is a card that I believe is extremely underrated and really powerful, even in Historic. At least in Historic, this has not seen much play, but remarkably, when I've been doing so much grinding on high up in the Mythic ladder in ranked territory, I occasionally go up against weird brews or aggressive decks that have this card, and they're always a really impressive person in a high rank. And so it always has led me to wonder, I need to explore this card further. But this card is so powerful. At its base, it's a 3 mana, 3/3 haste, because it's at the beginning of combat on your turn, you're giving a creature +1/+0, and it gains haste. So at the very least, if it's the only thing on board, you're just giving it haste to itself. You're attacking with a 3/3 creature, very aggressive. Again, if it's night, it's completely insane. Now it's a 3/4, potentially giving itself +2/+0 trample and haste now. Becomes a 5/4 haste for 3, which is absolutely absurd. There's nothing that good on rate in Historic that is just totally busted. But even more powerful than that, it can give this to any creature. So every subsequent creature you play after this now effectively has haste. So even just these small little dudes we talked about earlier, the Rahildas, the Containment Priests, these things can become threatening little haste beaters later in the game, as well as casting another one. You can double buff. This card is just super powerful for sure. And again, with that werewolf theme, we have all these things getting the day-night cycle going. So if it just happens to turn to night, that's freaking awesome. And now all these cards are way more powerful than they should be. And they're totally all fine, even if it doesn't turn to night. So Reckless Stormseeker, very powerful, allows you to quickly turn the corner in games and really dominate. Just a really aggressive card. Now we'll get to a little bit more interesting aspect that I've added to this deck. And I don't believe the original deck I was talking about that I witnessed a player on the ladder using this deck to get very high ranked. Like I said, I don't know their exact list. I only played them twice, so I only saw a handful of cards in the list. So I've kind of filled in the gaps where my knowledge is lacking of what their exact list is. And this was also pre-New Capenna, so Urabrask didn't exist yet. And the deck I faced did not run this Drannith Magistrate combo, but to me this is the most exciting part of this deck, is this potential of this soft to hard lock, if you will, of the opponent. But anyways, that being said, I had to fill in the gaps with a few additional cards. And this may seem a little weird, these additional 5 cards. 4 Wrath of Gods and a Deafening Clarion. So it may seem, I agree, it's a little weird that we're a creature deck that's also running creature sweepers. But let me try to explain why I think this is really good, especially in this best of one kind of meta that I often play in for just fast kind of grinding, trying to get high ranked quickly. We don't need to beat every deck. We want to, and this deck is configured to have a really good shot against literally any deck you could play against in the Historic ladder right now. But always remember, we don't control the coin flip. We may be on the draw, we may be on the play, stating the obvious, but where I'm going with this is that there are times when we're on the draw and this deck doesn't come out of the gates super fast and we're kind of on our heels. And if we're up against a really fast, aggressive deck like Elves or Red Deck Wins or that Symmetry Sage deck that's so hot right now, you will just fall behind so quickly, and it doesn't even matter that you have these haste creatures, because if they went first, they're just going to flood the board too quickly and overrun you. However, when we have 4 Wrath of Gods as well as a Deafening Clarion, now we have 5 sweepers, and given the cards that we show our opponent in the early game, maybe we helix something, we have a Rahilda or just a silly kind of hate bear type card in play. We're not super aggressive, and we're deploying creatures to the board. Your opponent is often going to, expel some energy or spells to kill these things. But more importantly, they're most likely not going to expect that you have a Wrath of God or a sweeper effect. Because, first of all, there's no open deck list, and this is a brew by all means. This is not a list that anyone's going to face often. It's not like an established archetype right now. So most people, they have no idea that you're running Wrath of God. And that gives you a huge advantage. And when you see your opening hand and then you learn what your opponent's playing, you can hold back some of these things if you're not desperate to block in the early game, or maybe you have a Lightning Helix, and you can let them deploy their cards, and most likely that's the correct thing for your opponent to do. If they're an aggro deck or elves, they will just deploy everything, and you can just Wrath of God, and oftentimes that's just enough. That's a game win right there, a total board wipe. And we need to have this card in here because it's so powerful against these aggro decks. Sometimes it's the only way out possible, because if we're going second, some of these decks, it's just math. Like, you can't get ahead of them with just, 4 Lightning Helix can do it, but you're not always going to have these, and some of these blockers won't be sufficient, especially if their creatures have flying. So you need a little bit more oomph in these sweepers just to cover those games where they come out of the gates fast. We've all played against elves where they just vomit out so many elves like by turn 3 and these tokens, and you have to have something sweeping. In addition, like a deck like Merfolk, which I think is very underplayed, probably because it requires just a lot of wild cards on Historic, but people play that deck very high in Mythic, very high rank, and without Wrath of Gods, like, that matchup is horrendous because you just can't compete with that kind of pressure of these creatures that are getting so large. So because we have these big game-ending haymakers at the 5 mana spot, we need a little bit more help to just clear the board against these aggro decks. Now, admittedly, obviously a Wrath of God's not great against control. However, all of the rest of these cards are pretty strong against control. Of course, the premier control deck in Historic right now is white-blue with and without Lotus. Very strong deck, some of the most powerful, if not the most powerful cards in the format. And you have decent game even against white-blue control in this deck. Again, these cards aren't so great there, but we're trying to be good against as much archetypes as possible. So against control, all of these things are fine. The haste creatures are deceivingly really powerful and aggressive and can get you there against control. But again, against aggro, you also have all these sweepers are huge to sweep the board and finish and close the game with a big 5 mana drop. In addition, clearing the board, instead of exiling everything and just destroying everything, this can make the Lion Sash become a bomb in the mid to late game after you've wiped the board multiple times and you've got some mana to work with and you play this. This can just get absolutely insane. In addition, there's so many graveyard decks that just again, they vomit and so much crap into their graveyard with Dragon's Rage Channeler. You have lands going into the graveyards, tons of permanents where Lion Sash can get out of control quickly, but it's especially good when you pair it with all these sweepers because you can have a bunch of material and fuel in the graveyard to fuel this thing. So this deck, again, I agree, it looks like a weird, just kind of a weird combination of cards, but there's all this subtle synergy that you start to realize the more you play this. And again, you always have that just bomb hard lock at just lurking around the deck of just oops, they connected and now the opponent's locked out of the game. So Wrath of God needs not much more explanation. Awesome sweeper. Do have one copy of the Deafening Clarion. Just a great Boros card. Just a 3-mana sweeper for just a little bit extra help getting through that early game, so we don't get run over by hyper-aggressive aggro decks, as well as the gaining lifelink. Absolutely relevant here. Against Burn and these Symmetry Sage powerful decks that have combination of fast aggressive creatures as well as Burn, getting a combat step where you connect and give all your creatures lifelink can be enough to turn the tide in those battles. If you have one of these 4/4s in play, or one of these, maybe the Slasher is becoming a 5/4 or buffing something else, and you give everything lifelink, if you get a shot where you're gaining like 6-8 life, that can be the difference in a game or a matchup where you survive one extra turn to beat them and just win the damage race. So that is hugely relevant as well as the 3 damage and giving everything lifelink when you have your 4/4s in play, where it can actually become beneficial to bomb the whole board, but have these guys potentially live and now strike with no blockers to speak of and gaining lifelink. So very powerful sweeper as well. Lastly, we can wrap up and get to the final card we haven't covered. We got another just Big Daddy Bomb Werewolf. Another card that I think really, to me, has been underrated. I know this definitely saw play in Standard and Alchemy, which I haven't dabbled in those formats for a few months now. I need to get back at it, but I believe this card is quite strong, even in Historic, deceivingly strong, really. Again, we've got that 4/4 haste for 5 standard, just standard aggressive beats, but then this comes with so much more. It's incredible. Menace is huge, absolutely relevant for getting through the damage. We mentioned it's a werewolf again, so if it's nighttime, this thing is out of control bomb. We're talking a menace haste 5/5 for 5. Whenever it attacks, it deals 2 damage to each of up to 1 creature, 1 player, and a planeswalker. And of course, if it's just the Volatile Arsonist and it's daytime, it's still very powerful. 4/4 menace haste. Instead, we're just doing 1 damage to each creature, planeswalker, and player, or a creature, player, and planeswalker. So it's important. This thing, it'll deal the damage when it attacks. So even if it's blocked, that's still some damage pushed through. Can be the difference in finishing off a planeswalker or just finishing off your opponent. They take 1 hit with this, as well as some of the other things. Their life total is going to be pretty low, and likely the next crack back attack with this thing, just the triggered damage is going to be enough to kill them as well. So you've got all this weird werewolf interaction, this weird unexpected control element in sweeping things. We've got all the hindrance of these hate bear creatures that deny a lot of the most powerful things that people are doing in Historic. And it just looks like a weird sloppy deck. But somehow, I'm telling you guys, this deck is for real. These cards are all very strong, and they cut out just a ton of bullshit that can take games on the ladder, and this just stops a lot of that. And against a lot of these aggro decks, they don't know your deck. They don't know you're about to blow up the board with Wrath of God. You can come out favorably with that for sure. But again, I'm so excited and love this Urabrask Drannith Magistrate combo. It is so sick when you connect these 2 cards and you're in a state that is manageable or you're ahead. That's game over. They cannot get out of that, most likely. And that's that. It's a ton of fun. It's deceivingly good. The lands, again, like usual in my videos, not too special, just a smattering of all the best Boros lands. We do have 4 creature lands, very good. We've got 2 Cave of the Frost Dragon, 2 Den of the Bugbears. Our mana is 50-50 split on white and red. We are actually at 26 lands, which is kind of a lot, but I believe it's very important because we want to be able to get enough lands to activate these and make them actually useful. But moreover, we really want to hit our land drops with this deck specifically because we've got such a powerful curve of effects, you really want to be able to hit your 5th land drop on the 5th turn. This just makes, these are some of the most powerful creatures for sure, you can cast at 5 mana. And getting to 5 mana without a hiccup is very important. So we've got a perfect 50-50 balance of white and red mana, as well as a near 50-50 deck balance of white and red. So this deck is very tuned. It's very, thought about all these different amounts of the cards specifically. There's certainly some few things you could tweak here and there, but I'm pretty set and feel solid about this. I know that 8 5-drops seems like a lot, but when you're curving out and you can get there by sweeping and staying alive with Lightning Helix and stuff, these cards are just absolutely devastating. These smaller to-the-ground aggro decks, they can't handle these huge beaters. And again, when it becomes nighttime, it's time to play. That's when you come out and you just bring the heat with these cards and absolutely decimate your opponent. So very cool, fun deck. Hope you guys like it. Again, I'm Sci-Hi. Like and subscribe if you're not already for more content like this, more deck ideas. And I hope you enjoy the Drannith Magistrate Urabrask combo. I have a deck list below. If you play this deck or have tried this combo already, let me know what you think of it. Let me know of other ideas for the decks or other shells or how this can interact. But I've been really liking this configuration. It's a really interesting deck, and it's really deceivingly good. And if you're like me and get sick of all the archetypes and the same decks, and like to try something new but is also really competitive, I think you'll love this deck because it definitely can go high up in Mythic for sure. I've already seen proof of it with my own experience with the deck, as well as playing against this other person who inspired the deck, to me at least. It's very powerful, so let me know what you think. This is Boros Werewolves with a soft to hard lock. And that's all I got for this video, guys. Take care and peace. And as always, good luck on the ladder.